everyone, my name is Renee Seebacher, and I'm a second-year Integrated Language Arts education major here at YSU. Today we are going to be embarking on a cultural exploration surrounding Adib Khorram's Darius the Great is Not Okay. We'll begin with some brief summary and background on Darius and his culture, and then we'll move on to an activity that will allow us to further explore our own cultures and hopefully learn more about the cultures of others as well. So now that you have a little bit of an idea of what this session will entail, let's spill some tea. Beginning with some discussion of our protagonist, Darius. Darius is a character who is often very unsure of himself, and in this way, he presents a sort of relatability to readers. He struggles to find his place, and he has a lot of self-doubt. He has so much that he wants to say and do, but he can't bring himself to actually put those thoughts into words or put those wants into actions. And a lot of that self-doubt stems from some of his family relationships. So for example, Darius feels almost no connection to his dad. He often feels that his dad is extremely disappointed in him, that he continually lets him down. And besides the fact that neither of them speak Farsi, the only time they really bond with one another is watching that one episode of Star Trek together every night. As for Darius's relationship with his mom, he relates to her in the sense that they look alike. However, he does not speak Farsi like she and his little sister Layla do. Now, Darius and Layla have an extremely close relationship. They play dolls together, they have tea parties, but Darius sort of grows to envy Layla. And that's because she does sort of fit in with that Persian culture and she can speak Farsi. So therefore, when Mamu and Babu chime in for their FaceTime call on the computer, Darius kind of feels this disconnect because he sees Layla talk to them and tell them about her day, and she's able to communicate with them and understand what they're saying back in that Farsi language. But Darius can't, and he feels awkward, and he doesn't know what to say to them or how to talk to them. And that disconnect that he feels is evident on page 24 when he says, "It was like Layla belonged to that reality, but I was just a guest." So it's like there's a wall up between him and his grandparents and him and his Persian culture, and he just can't seem to figure out how to cross that barrier. So therefore, knowing that Darius was extremely nervous to talk to his grandparents through the computer screen, you can only imagine how nervous he was when he found out that him and his family were going on a trip to Iran. So as you all know, Darius and his family made the trip to Iran because Babu had a brain tumor. And Darius's mom wanted to soak up as much time as she could with her dad while she still had that chance. So naturally, Darius experiences those same communication struggles that he did through the computer screen in real life. There are plenty of times, especially with Babu, that he wishes that he could say, "Although we are different, and although I don't speak Farsi, I'm still your grandson, and I still really want to get to know you." But he can't take those thoughts and put them into words. He can't convey those feelings to Babu. So one of the most influential people in bringing Darius kind of out of that shell was Sarab. Sarab essentially became Darius's best friend. They could sit together in silence, and it was completely normal, and it was comfortable, and they could talk to each other without fear of judgment. Sarab got Darius out on the soccer field, and they just had tons of fun together, and Sarab essentially really allowed Darius to embrace his Persian culture and made him feel more comfortable in Iran, and he had a friend there, so he felt more at home because he met Sarab. So one of the most influential moments with Sarab is at the end of the Noru Celebration, where he and Darius come inside, and they overhear Darius's dad saying to Babu that Sarab is Darius's first ever friend. Now, naturally, Darius is very embarrassed by this statement. He can't believe that his dad just said that and that Sarab heard it. But Sarab actually says on page 196, "Your place was empty for me too. I never had a friend either." And that statement kind of validated Darius's feeling that he wasn't the only one that was missing that piece in their life. He wasn't the only one who had that void, and they were able to fill that for each other. So they created a really strong bond that really helped Darius feel more comfortable throughout his trip to Iran and feel more confident in accepting his Persian culture. So, of course, we cannot have a discussion about Darius the Great is not okay without talking about tea. Tea is central to Darius's life. He absolutely loves tea, and it's one of the first true connections he has to his Persian culture before he makes the trip to Iran. So as he says on page 2, as a people group, Persians are genetically predisposed to like tea. And though I was only half Persian, I had inherited a full-strength tea-loving gene sequence from my mom. So his love for tea is his main connection to his Persian culture. It's one of the only things that he feels like relates him to that Persian side of his being. And he has so much knowledge about tea, and that knowledge actually becomes a bit of a frustration at his job at Tea Haven because he knows so much about tea, but his boss won't let him express that knowledge because it's elitist. However, Darius is still very specific about the way he likes his tea, like any Persian tea drinker would be. So, of course, he has to have filtered water. Can't be tap water because filtered tastes so much better. He keeps the secret toasted rice ingredient a secret from everybody because his mom would not be happy if she knew because a true Persian wouldn't pop rice. And there's certain teas like pu'er that he will not drink because he does not like the taste of it. So the fact that he's very specific about his taste in tea, again, exemplifies that there are little hints of that Persian culture coming through in his day-to-day life. Another instance that shows how significant tea is to Darius in his culture is when he gifts tea to Mamu when they first get to Iran. Now, obviously, he wanted to give her something special, and he knew that he knows a lot about tea, so he could talk to Mamu about that, and it would kind of be like an icebreaker because he knows a lot about it, and obviously she loves tea too. So tea is essentially Darius's comfort zone. It's the one thing that really relates him from the beginning to his Persian culture, and he knows a lot about it, and he knows how to talk about it. So in that sense, it's kind of like his almost a coping mechanism, and it gets him out of a lot of uncomfortable situations. For example, at the Noru Celebration, Babu had a bit of an episode and he started yelling at Mamu, and tensions were very high in the room. It was sort of an awkward situation for everybody. So what did Darius do? He immediately got some tea going. He turned that kettle on because that makes him feel more comfortable. So tea is extremely important not only to the Persian culture, but to Darius's day-to-day life as well. So, along with tea being important to the Persian culture, we have the Noru Celebration. The Noru Celebration is the big celebration in the Persian culture, and it marks the Persian New Year, or the first day of spring. So, Darius described the Noru Celebration as sort of like Christmases to Americans. So, it's their big celebration. Some of the things that go into the Noru Celebration are the Persian casual dress, which is actually very dressed up. It's kind of like a suit and tie event without the tie, of course, because nobody wears a tie in Iran. And then they have the half scene, which is their display of 7 items that are significant and all start with the letter S. Then, of course, they do presents and have tons of food. They have delicious desserts like baklava. They have mountains of food. They have leftovers for days. Food is central to the celebration. Everyone loves food. And then, of course, tea. You can't have a Persian celebration without tea. And then they have the dancing. So the dancing is extremely significant in this book because there's a moment at the Noru Celebration where Sarab brings Darius onto the dance floor, and Darius is holding Sarab's hand in one hand and Mamu's in the other, and they're dancing around in a circle. And Darius describes it on page 186, saying, "It was the most fun I had ever had." Now, this is important because this is the first time in the book where he really feels at home in Iran, and he really feels like he's a part of that Persian culture. And for the first time, he's outside of his head. He's living in the moment, and he's having so much fun, and he feels Persian. And then, of course, they play Rook, which is the card game that a lot of the men will play after dinner during the celebration. So, now that we know about the Noru Celebration, we're we're going to talk a little bit about Dariuss's influence on Darius. Now, Dariuss and Darius are the same person. Dariuss is what they call Darius in Iran. It's his Persian name. However, the mindset and the way Dariuss acts, the way Darius acts in Iran, has a significant impact on Darius himself when he goes back home. So one of the first influential moments we see is on page 254. At this moment, Darius is talking to Mamu, and he's realizing that his grandmother is so much more than that virtual figure that he saw on the computer screen for all those years. She's a real person with so many stories and so many unique characteristics, and he wants to get to know her. He wants to know all of these things about her. But he's struggling inside his head. He can't bring himself to ask or to say anything. And then finally he says, "When did you start listening to ABBA?" And while it's a seemingly simple question, it means so much because he finally took those thoughts and turned them into words and asked her the question that he wanted to ask her and expressed that he wants to know more about her. This trip also improved Darius's relationship with his dad because they finally sat down and had that moment where they discussed what was the problem and why was there a disconnect in their father-son bond. And they finally revealed to one another that their mental health played a big role in it. And Darius's dad wasn't always disappointed in Darius, but rather he was just scared for him. He didn't want him to go through the same struggles that he did. And finally, you start to see that barrier come down between them, and you see a real loving, compassionate moment between father and son where they finally express what each of them has been bottling up to each other. And his dad says, "It's okay not to be okay." And that's the first time we really see that compassion between father and son. And then, of course, when Darius gets back home, the soccer coach, or football as they would call it back in Iran, approaches him and says, "Hey, you should try out for the soccer team." And Darius's initial thought is, "No, absolutely not. That's not something I would be interested in." But then he realizes that would be Darius's reaction to that situation. Dariuss would try out. He would go for it. So what does Darius do? He considers it, and he's considering joining the team and trying out. So you can see how he takes those aspects of his self from Iran and transforms them into American life and takes them with him. And then there's also a stronger family bond between Darius, his mom, his dad, and Layla, between all of them. They start watching Star Trek together, and they have family tea time. And they're so much closer, and that wall that was between them that divided, Layla and mom can speak Farsi, but Darius and dad can't, it's not there anymore. They realize that you don't have to be 100% one, especially Darius realizes that you don't have to be 100% Persian to be part of Persian culture, and you don't have to be 100% American to fit in American culture. You can be both, and you can be exactly who you are, and that's okay. And Darius finally realizes that when at the end of the book, his dad asks him, "Is everything okay?" And he says on page 312, "I'm great." He finally realizes that although he's a fractional Persian, he doesn't totally fit in with one or totally fit in with the other. He doesn't have to be 100% one or the other. He can be exactly who he is and still be great. So now that we know a little bit more about Darius and his culture and how learning more about his culture influenced him as an individual as well as influenced his family bond, it is now activity time. So for this activity, I want you to create your own recipe card that answers the question, what's the tea on your culture? So you can choose your culture as a whole, or you can focus on one specific event or holiday or celebration that occurs within your culture or within your family that really makes you feel like, I am a part of this. I am a part of this culture. I am a part of my family. That makes you feel like you're home. So once you pick that event or you pick your culture as a whole, you will list on that recipe card all the things that go into making up that celebration or that holiday or that culture. So for example, going back a few slides, Darius might choose to make a recipe card on the Noru Celebration because that was such a huge part of his Persian culture. And on that recipe card, he would list out things like the Persian casual dress, the half scene, the presents, the food, the dance, all the things that go together to make up that celebration. Or he might choose to make a recipe card based on the fact that he's a fractional Persian. So he may include things like understanding a few Farsi words but not being able to fluently speak the language, and focus on that element of his culture and his being. And you can make this recipe card using whatever platform is easiest for you. You can use Microsoft Word, Google Docs, Microsoft PowerPoint, Google Slides, or you can make it with pen and paper. Whatever you feel will really express the creativity and will express your culture best. So for my family, our big celebration is Christmas Eve. So I made my recipe card for a Seebacher family Christmas Eve. Now every Christmas Eve, my family goes over to our Aunt Laura and Uncle Dave's house, and the first thing we do is all three of us cousins, me, my sister, and our cousin Matthew, we pose for a photo in front of the Christmas tree. This is absolutely something that must be done every single Christmas Eve. Our moms will not let us have a Christmas Eve without taking this photo. And we actually have a scrapbook that holds all the pictures, and it's really cool to look back on and see how we all grew up with each other throughout the years. And then we watched Shark Tank. But we just recently started watching Shark Tank a couple years ago, but it's become a tradition. And we'll all sit in the family room and just have it on the TV, and we'll say, would you invest in that product, or are you interested in that? And it's just really fun. And then, of course, we have our delicious meal and tons of Christmas cookies. My personal favorites are clothespins and butterballs. And then we have a table full of Christmas crackers. So after dinner, everyone at their seat has sort of like a party favor. And it's wrapped up like a candy. And we'll take turns going around the table, popping them open. And inside, everyone gets a little paper crown to wear on their head. And there's a little joke or a riddle inside. And we'll go around the table and take turns reading them and trying to solve them. And it always results in tons of laughs, and it's a really good time. And then, of course, we do our gift exchange, and then we spend the rest of the night playing catchphrase. And all those things combine together for hours of holly jolly Seebacher family fun. So after you make your recipe card, it's time to spill the tea. After you've generated your card that has all the things that go into making up your culture and that make you you, share that information with somebody else. It can be a family member, a friend, a classmate, anyone you want. And maybe you could even ask that person to create their own recipe card and then share the information about their culture with you. So you can learn what makes them them, what's important to their family and to their culture and to their celebrations. And what else you can do is you can compare your recipe card to that of your friends and see if there's any similarities between your celebrations, or you can compare your recipe card to the one that Darius may have made about the Noru Celebration. So on this next slide, I chose to compare a Seebacher family Christmas Eve to the Noru Celebration. And I actually came across a lot of similarities that I was not expecting. So for example, us three cousins posing for a photo is similar to how Darius and his family posed for photos behind the half scene at their Noru Celebration. And of course, we have our delicious meal and our table full of cookies, just like Darius had his meal and all their food and their special desserts. And then, of course, both celebrations include a gift exchange, presents, and then how we play catchphrase, they played rook. So we both have that game going on too. Thank you all so much for listening today. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about Darius and the Noru Celebration, as well as exploring your own culture and learning about the cultures of others. I hope you are enjoying the YSU English Festival this year, and of course, keep on reading. Thank you.